For an insight into GMP data and calculations, I'm joined now from Equiniti by Steve Nicholson, the Technical Director. Steve, thank you for joining us here on PMI TV. To start with, who does GMP equalisation affect?
Okay, well, I'll give you a narrow definition, but then explain it can affect far more people than the narrow definition. So the narrow definition is that it would affect members of pension schemes who accrued GMP between 1990 and 1997. And that, I guess, for a typical scheme, that might be 1 in 2 members. However, the narrow definition is still only those who would have been advantaged as the other sex. And so that might mean only 1 in 2 of those. So 1 in 4 members might be affected. So that's our narrow definition. However, I think many schemes might take advantage of the exercise, the opportunity to undertake conversion of all GMP, perhaps in conjunction with a pension increase exercise. And so potentially GMP equalisation affects many members in a pension scheme. You know, it could be 1 in 2 if those schemes choose to undertake the wider exercise.
And what are the options for calculating GMP equalisation?
Okay, well, the Lloyd's judgment, which came out in 2018, had 2 leading options. So it considered a range of options, but it had 2 leading options in the judgment. So to understand those, consider a deferred member coming up to retirement. So under the dual payroll option, when that member came to retirement, you would undertake 2 calculations. One is a male and one is a female. And you would put the higher benefit into payment. And then each year you would track the female benefit and the male benefit. And crucially, you would track their accumulated payment, specifically at interest, simple with bank-based rates with 1%. And if on an accumulated basis, the other one was higher, you would put that other one into payments. And so that's the method C2 that was described in the judgment. Sounds complex? Yes, it is. The other method was simpler, called conversion, whereby the GMP would be converted to something else. And that something else might be higher or lower. It would have potentially a different shape. But the member, in effect, wouldn't have the offending GMP, the GMP that was unequal within their benefit. That was described as method D2.
And given that so many schemes and individuals have already gone through GMP equalisation, why is it proving an issue for those schemes and individuals who haven't gone through it yet?
Okay, Mark. Well, I think you're referring to schemes that equalise their GMP before the Lloyd's judgment. And so those schemes were free to do what they thought was appropriate. Perhaps the biggest example were the PPF schemes, but these schemes were generally discontinuing. And so they were able just to pick their method and get on with it. Specifically, say, with the PPF, that's probably equalised hundreds, if not thousands of schemes now. They were able to use something like method B, which was simply paying the higher of the 2, and none of that requirement to track accumulated payments or to convert. And so it was a lot easier before the judgment.
So why is it proving harder now?
Okay, well, as I said in my previous answer, the Lloyd's judgment had 2 leading methods, and both of them are quite difficult to implement. Under the dual payrolls, you have to upgrade your systems and ensure you have your data. And the anti-franking side of that is also very complicated, which I'll refer to in my next, later in the interview. In respect of conversion, there are practical difficulties as well, because you need to get permission from the employer, from the trustee, and from the member. There's also tax considerations, and further judgments are due to inform trustees and schemes what they need to do. And so, in a sense, there's no rush to be the first person to do this. You need to understand everything, because it is a complex, expensive exercise to undertake.
You mentioned anti-franking. What is it? Why is it such an issue in connection with GMP equalisation?
Okay, great. Anti-franking is something that affects few members in a pension scheme normally. It might be 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 members. But it's a source of the perhaps the most significant inequality between males and females, because the age at which the anti-franking test is done is different. For females, the age is 60, and for males, the age is 65. So I'll explain what anti-franking is about. First thing perhaps to know is the GMP is a statutory benefit, and it goes up each 6th of April. And if it's delayed beyond your GMP payment age, so that's 60 for a female, 65 for a male, that actually goes up each week. But it's part of an overall scheme benefit, and that scheme benefit might go up differently. So, for example, for a pensioner before GMP payment age, their scheme pension might not go up at all. There was no legislative requirement for it to go up. And so at 60 for a female and 65 for a male, there's a test undertaken to make sure you haven't offset the non-GMP benefits against these GMP benefits. And that could lead to a step up. So what does that mean in respect of GMPization? Well, if I was converting a male to a female, I would effectively be taking away possibly a male stat at 65, and then maybe considering adding on a later earnings addition at 60 for the female. And so whilst it affects few members, it's complex stuff that requires more data and has to be handled with care.
If you're trying to calculate someone's pension benefits, it sounds incredibly complicated. What do you do if you haven't got all the data?
Okay, well, that's a good point. But fortunately, there's different ways to get to the answer. So perhaps the first thing you might think of here is that you need all the data, perhaps going back some 30 years, to put together that member's benefit. So that might be going back to the leaving date and putting together his leaving pension and then carrying that all the way through. So effectively repeating the administration. However, there are shortcuts. So an alternative technique to full reconstruction is to use formulaic approaches that deliver the answer, or rollback. And these drive off the current payroll that you do have. Perhaps the most important item is having the right GMP. And so these projects follow on from projects that have happened across the industry to agree GMPs with HMRC. That's referred to as GMP reconciliation. And so I think actually it'll be unusual not to have sufficient data for most situations, but for the anti-franking, which requires more data, and maybe with dependents where you're putting together the first life's data. So these are all quite complex remote things. But suppose you didn't have enough data. Well, I guess then what we've seen in the past is people using a broad brush approach where they might give an approximate adjustment, particularly if you're doing a conversion where actually you're changing the GMPs anyway. And so there are ways to deal with insufficient data.
We have to leave it there. Steve Nicholson, thank you.
Thank you.